from their encounters with races from other planets. The information is the activation. Let's awaken this world together. We are the forever students, and we will not be silent. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. It's pretty wild. Welcome, everybody, to Full Spectrum Universe. My name is Rob Yox. Of course, almost forgot my whole name. We are the embattled broadcast from behind enemy lines in the once great state of New York, trying to make a difference in this world. Tonight, we have one of our very, very special friends to the podcast. We have Stephen and Evan Strong. Evan is currently recovering from a migraine, so we're going to have Stephen on with us. It's going to be an absolute epic episode as usual. We're going to be talking a little bit about their upcoming conference that they have, the one that they do just about monthly on Mary Magdalene and the Gnostic writings and traditions, basically. Before we get to that, I wanted to let everybody know that on the YouTube channel, we have posted 2 out of the 3-day events. We have a 3-day event with 15 speakers coming up. The first 2 days are up there for you to look at. We're going to be diving into timelines and what that means. We're going to be talking about so many other topics within that, because we're going to redefine what we believe timelines are, or at least going to give some parameters and kind of show people coming into this next winter solstice some of the things that we've learned over the last year and some of the tools that we've kind of put in our tool case to essentially walk into this new Yuga cycle in completely ready to bear with information and things like that. So without further ado, we're going to bring up Stephen Strong. There he is. What's going on, brother? How are you? So fantastic to see you. I love having you guys come on all the time. We could get into deep conversations about just about anything, but how are you tonight?
Not bad. Unfortunately, you've only got me today because Evan's in a state of disrepair. But yeah, look, I'm not bad. Yourself?
I'm doing absolutely phenomenal, especially now that we are here to talk. And I wanted to ask you a lot of not so many different questions. I kind of want to give you the lead to talk about the upcoming conference, but yeah. We've talked a lot about, contact and our alien ancestry. Of course, you guys have the website, which is in the description below. And the event itself there's still tickets available. And that link is also in the description. So everybody can basically go click right on it and, reserve your seat at the conference. So tell me, what exactly is this, the kind of like the shift to Mary Magdalene and the Gnostic teachings after doing, contact of indigenous peoples for so long? How has this transition come about for you?
Well, actually, it's for us, it's a no-brainer because we didn't have an option. We had to do it at some stage. The reason being, when the Hopi speak of the old teachings, some people seem to think that means the old teachings of what the indigenous people, be it the American Indians, Canadian Indians, the Australian original people, the Dravidians, it doesn't matter. They seem to think that what we're talking about is what was found out by the hunter-gatherer societies. But that's not true, because there were 2 parts to this story. Like humanity around 6,000 years didn't break up into races so much. They broke up into lifestyles. You had before then, basically everyone was hunter-gatherer. Then a group decided to become, sedentary, and started to compete against nature. Well, they had to, basically, in some respects. Well, they didn't have to, but they chose to anyway. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt there, Rob. We won't be too hard on that. But that's not to say that the old sedentary people who did this to begin with didn't have wisdom of their own. And I think if we didn't at some stage look at this in the proper context, then we'd be doing a disservice to talking about old teachings, because it would seem to infer that the only decent old teachings came from the Hopi, from the original people, from the pagans, from the Druids, and no one else had something wise or something worthwhile to look at. Well, the truth is there was. And I mean, we could look at Islam, we could look at Buddhism, we could look at Hinduism, and people have done that. But the part that's been missed in all of this was what happened to Christianity. And people have got to understand something about this. Let's go back to the time. Of course, some people say this didn't happen, but let's just work on the assumption it did. That Jesus was born, okay? Now, whether it was a virgin birth or not, I'm not going to go down that path for now, but we will later on in the piece. But the important part is this. He was born and acknowledged. By whom? By the Jewish community? No, they didn't acknowledge him. In fact, they said he wasn't. What about the Romans? No, they just washed their hands. Literally, Pontius Pilate washed his hands of the whole thing. So who acknowledged them? 3 Magi who came from the East. And people don't actually factor in. That to me is a very important clue as to what was going on here. Now, I'm not suggesting that when Judaism began that 3 Magi from the East came and acknowledged someone there as a leader, because they didn't. I'm not suggesting that happened anywhere else, because it didn't, but it did happen on this occasion. So you've got to ask yourself, why did those Magi from the East come? And they gave us the impression this was a prophecy. But here's the point. It was a prophecy known of in the East, but I see nothing in any of, even in the Gnostic Scriptures to begin with, I see nothing there that gives me any clue as to what influence they had. But there is one Gnostic scripture, and we had to talk about this recently, that does give a clue where this wisdom came from. Now, it's not in the Bible as such, because as you probably know, right around 321 or 322, Constantine, after smiting his enemy and killing them all, after he saw Jesus in the sky and decided to kill everyone he could see, bar his own people, because you've got to look after them, he selected 20 bishops to make a Bible. And they chose a lot of books. And one of the ones they wouldn't have chosen was Thunder, the Perfect Mind. Now, Thunder, the Perfect Mind was part of the Nag Hammadi texts that were found in 1947. Then the Vatican put a 25-year ban on any mention of them. And in Thunder, they had a biblical scholar. They had all these biblical scholars working on this, the Nag Hammadi test, and they got the best biblical scholars, not religious scholars from other places. Now, Thunder's interesting because Thunder is a series of statements which are often contradictory, that always start with the word I am great, I am weak, and it goes all the way through that. And the scholars were thrown by it. And the reason they were thrown by it is they could find nothing in Judaic writings. In fact, they could find nothing anywhere that was similar. But there were some texts they quoted, and it was from the Bhagavad Gita. It was all from the Hindu text. And they said, that's identical. Man, what this woman has written, and we're not sure whether this woman is Eve, Isis, or Mary Magdalene. But here's my point. If it's Eve, and we'll talk about Eve in a sec, she was around right at the very beginning, man, and she was in not in India, okay? And if you read the Bible, basically, man, Eve and Adam, that was all there was. And then one day they were naughty and they got thrown out, okay? So we can't really see that same scriptures that are in the Hindu scriptures would go through Eve. Isis, well, she was involved in Egypt a fair bit. In fact, she was involved in reassembling Osiris and very much involved in the running of Egypt. There's not really a lot of time to do study there and go to India. But when you go to Jesus, there's a lot of people who will claim to you that Jesus went to India. Well, I would say to you, well, what's going on with Thunder? Because Thunder has no parallel to any literature anywhere but in India. So when you factor those things in, if we didn't look at Gnosticism, I think it would be a mistake, because we wouldn't be doing all of the old teachers. And in particular, what has thrown us a fair bit, and I'd like to talk about this a fair bit today, Rob, is that in original society, if I can give you an example of this, at the very beginning, when Mr. Cook turned up with his mob, and then soon after Philip turned up with about 13 ships and about 1,000 armed men and refused to leave, during that period of time, when they first came here, they basically looked around and said, okay, we're going to take this place. We aren't going to sign a treaty. We made the mistake with the Americans and the Maoris. We're not doing it here. But what we'll do is we'll go to each of their men there and we'll come along and we'll lie to them. And we'll tell them we're going to do this and we're going to do that. We'll get them to agree to it. And then we'll take their land and eventually we'll corral them and kick them in there. But here's what was interesting. In every occasion, they'd have a meeting. And I read this often. The men would agree with the other white men that came along and said, yeah, we're going to do that. And they'd say, yeah, just one more thing, but now we've got to go out and ask the women. And then they'd come back and invariably women would see through what the white men were on about and the fact that their own men didn't see through. And they'd say, no, we're not doing it. And the settlers were shocked. They could not understand what the deal was. And they said, but we made an agreement with you. And they said, yes, you made an agreement with us, but you didn't make an agreement with the women. And the women do not agree. And therefore, we can't do this anymore. Now, for me, I look at religions and philosophies and ask myself, does it work around that base where men and women are equal? And I've got to be honest, when I look at some of the institutionalized religions, not all of them, if you look at the Hindu religion, you'll find out it was Krishna had a mate, a female, and she was with him too, and she was just as important. What we found in Gnosticism, which made me start to think, hang on about this, where's this Gnosticism originally coming from, is a complete equality between men and women. And that did not end up in the Bible. That's not the fault of Jesus or the disciples or anyone. Well, some of them it is. It's the fault of the censor who put together this book. You said the Gospel of Mary? No, we're not putting that in. The Gospel of Eve? No, we're not putting that in. The Gospel of Mary Salome? No, we're not putting that in. Any gospel that had a woman's name on it was not put in. And that to me is the clue in this. I ask myself, why is it in Gnosticism I have this really, really strong feminine presence? But when we go to the other book, oh yeah, Mary's mentioned occasionally. In fact, Mary Magdalene until about 1969 was proclaimed a prostitute. Then in 1969, 3 years before the Nag Hammadi texts were coming out and the biblical scholars were working on it, the Vatican decided to say, oh, look, for the last 1,000 years, we've called Mary Magdalene a prostitute. We've decided she's not anymore. So just ignore that, please. And virtually no one has even taken into account. But that was only done because Gnosticism has a completely different story about women than what you find in the Bible. And when we read that, we realized that what I'm seeing there is exactly the same as what takes place in the dreaming. It's also in Gnosticism, and it's really in most other religions, with the exception of two that took the females out of the equation. Now, whether it's the Judaic religion, which took a Shira, who around about the 8th century BC was being worshipped more than Yahweh. So what they did, Asherah was the woman, and she was the tree, and people were worshipping the tree, and that sounds very much like the dreaming. They basically wrote her out of the scriptures completely and dumped her. Whereas with the biblical scholars, they just said, first of all, we're not writing about any of their scriptures, and the ones where they're mentioned, we'll marginalize them. What do? Well, with Mary Magdalene, we'll make her a prostitute, and with Mary, the mother, we'll just leave her in the background. She doesn't do much, but we'll just leave her walking around there. Oh, when it comes to Salome and when it comes to Martha, well, we'll mention them, but we certainly won't give any clues as to what they did. So basically, that's why we decided we would look at the Christian story, but we're not going to look at it from the book that everyone knows about. We're looking at it from the book that should have gone in there, but the Roman conqueror decided what we will and won't put in that fits their expectation and what the Roman regime and the Roman Empire needed. And what they didn't need was women. What they did need was miracles. And what they needed was a person they could follow who then they could claim the Pope is next in line and therefore have an ownership of what God says and what God did. And that's what came about here. That's the major difference. Gnosticism There is no church. And the priest can be male or female. And what they would do at a Gnostic meeting, they would have little balls or numbers or something, and they draw it out. Oh, look, I'm the priest today. I got number 6. Okay, I'll be the priest. It was a completely different setup. And that's the part we wanted to look at some more, Rob.
You know, I love that you're saying that too, because one of the things that we're coming into now is this redefinition of the masculine and the feminine energy. And going back so far, as soon as somebody whitewashes something or rewrites it, it's always a good instinct to go look at what they did and kind of take it apart because there's something being hidden there. It's a red flag. And, you know, one of the things that we're seeing is they're perpetually keeping mankind out of balance for a reason. And as they're working through this, just like you said, with some of the ancient teachings of the indigenous peoples, it was very much balanced. And now they're kind of taking hold of that. And one of the questions I have for you is even though we're talking about a specific period of time, and with all of the prospect of contact, could these stories have actually come from off world and kind of come to world and given to man as sort of an ideology that's sort of galactic in a way?
Well, I've got to say yes, indirectly by 2 degrees of separation, because I know the dreaming very much has what is called sky heroes by Army. Duramulin, who came from the skies. By Army's wife was not born, in fact, that's written in the rocks there, was not born of the earth, but came from above, as did by Army. Yes, I've got rocks there that are about them coming for the first time and us using our magic to stop them. And finally we didn't, and they came and they became part of us. Yeah, that is common. The dreaming is a combination of that. But what I see is when I look at, say, the Indian religion, if you look at the start of the Indian religion, you've got shields flying up in the sky and they're actually shooting at one another, man. It's the same story. And these guys are blue. I mean, there's a few clues here, I can assure you. It's very clear. In the Hindu religion, they talk about the start, about these flying shields and these people flying in the sky. So yes, it's in there. Yes, it's in the dreaming. And you've got to remember, in the Gospel of Thomas, someone comes up to Jesus. I can't remember which of the disciples is. It's in here somewhere. Trust me, I've got it basically right anyway. It says, tell me about this religion you've created. And Jesus said, no, you mean the bubbling spring I am tending. Now, I'm of the opinion this bubbling spring that is tending. Now, where does a bubbling spring come from? It comes from the earth. It's a symbolic of water. Water is a women's business. I think that gives us a clue. It's not as if he's creating something. I think what he's doing is passing on wisdom that is not known in the West. That's what becomes very clear to me. And this is the point we've got to factor in. And before you say that, remember what I said at the start. The 3 Magi did not come from the West. They came from the East. There's no biblical scholar that will disagree with me on this. Then that is the most important part of the Bible, because they are the ones who anointed Jesus. It's a bit like the Dalai Lama, man, when they do these different tricks on the kids to find out who's the one that's come back from before. Once those authorities, which would be the same as the 3 Magi, make that decision, that's the Dalai Lama, that's the end of the conversation, man. It's not as if someone says, oh, no, my daughter, she's pretty good too. I'm going to take this to the High Court and we're going to see if we can win this. Doesn't happen like that. The 3 Magi or the 7 oracles of Delphi, it doesn't matter who they are. There are authorities on this, and when they speak, nobody argues the point. And in the Bible, everyone said that was confirmation that Jesus was someone special. So, I mean, it's given in the Bible. So, yes, there is a difference here. But for me, Rob, the real difference in this is when you start to look at these Gospels, there is one, remember Dan Brown book, the one that came up first, the Da Vinci Code.
Yes.
And as you know, the 2 people who are on this particular next talk, which is Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince, were actually advisors on that show. They were working with them to get this right. Now, what's interesting with that was the whole story was about, we don't want the Gospel of Thomas to get out. That's what it was about. And you've got to remember that there was a 25-year embargo, the censorship, they slammed it on until 72, and then it came out everywhere. But what's interesting, when you go to the last saying, verse 114 in the Gospel of Thomas, Peter speaks. Now, as you know, Rob, that when we pass on, some people believe Peter's sitting up there in a big chair and there's a gate and he's got all the things written down there, right? Well, I've got some news for you. If that's true, if you're a woman, you're going to hell. And let me explain why. I haven't got the exact quote, but it goes very much like this. On verse 114, Peter says to Jesus, Mary should leave us, for all women are unworthy of breath and they should be dead. And then, oh, by the way, I'm not making this up, okay? This is exactly, people when they say, they look at me like, are you sure I said that? Mate, I can find comments like that from Peter and Andrew all the way through the Bibles, all the way through the Gospels. And what Jesus tries to say to him, and by the way, a couple of times he got so fed up, he just walked away from Peter and said, you just don't understand this, do you? Don't understand. Now, you've got to remember, let's put this into context, what Peter said there. Let's go back to the Gospel of Philip, okay? Now, Philip is another one of these things where Mary's involved in this. And I can tell you now, in virtually every one of these Gospels that have been cut out, Mary's in here. Pistis Sophia, there's one section there where Jesus and Mary talk and ask and answer questions, 26 shots in a row, and no one else speaks. Peter said, when are we going to get a chance to say something? And Jesus basically said, when you've got something worthwhile to say, sit down and shut up. Now, I want to give you an example of the difference Mary takes in this story, because it's very important. You've got to remember, when we lost the feminine principles on this planet, and we've done that over the last 6,000 years. Do you know what this last 6,000 years has been? It's basically pocketed with one thing. I used to be a history teacher in high school. War. Yes, it's called war. And then we study people who are good, you know, like Galileo, who would not publish his book while he was alive because they would have killed him, right? We look at these people and say, aren't they great? Put them in context, boys and girls. And at that time, they were reviled. They were really not appreciated at all. But I want to read to you this now. This comes from the Dialogue of the Saviour. And in the Dialogue of the Saviour, I'm going to read a couple of quotes. Normally, Evan does that, but he's not with us today, so I'm going to have to battle on regardless. And if I make a mistake, I'll blame him, even though he's cruel. And there's two parts I want to read there that give you an indication of something about Mary that sits above all of the others. Now, what happens is Jesus takes away three disciples. Matthew, who's the other one there? Matthew, Thomas, and Mary. Okay? And what you've got is a question and answer session where Jesus says to them, you can ask me any question you want. And what tends to happen is Matthew and Thomas ask questions. Mary doesn't. Mary makes statements all the time. And I'm just going to read a couple to you. This is from 53 to 55, where Mary speaks and Jesus responds. And this is what it says. This is what Mary said. And I don't fully get all the stuff she says anyway. She says there, thus with respect as to the wickedness of each day, and the labor is worthy of his food, and the disciple resembles his teacher. She uttered this as a woman who had understood completely. Now, what I'm finding in these books, this comment about she said this is one who knows everything. It's not as if Jesus says something and anything after that, because when that happens to them, Jesus said this. They sort of said, how come she gets this? And he said, well, here it is. You are from fullness, and you dwell in this place where deficiency is. And lo, his light is poured upon me. Now, I want to go to another scripture now, the Gospel of Philip, and I want to explain what happened there. Remember, Peter said Mary should be dead. And by the way, there are many quotes where he says woman should be dead. And I feel like Jesus should ask him, well, who gave birth to you? But that's not important. He tried that once and it didn't work.
It's crazy.
Oh, no, it's true. I've got to make the point, and I'm not making this up. I could find you a dozen quotes where Philip basically says, I hate women. I wish they were all dead. That's basically all he says. Now, what I find interesting is I want to give you another quote. This is in the Gospel of Philip, where all of the men are getting a bit chuffed. And they come up. Now, they come up to him and say this, primarily, why do you kiss Mary on the mouth often? By the way, they're the words that come from Philip, not mine. And why do you love her more than you love us? Now, Jesus could tell them to mind their own bloody business. I would have. It's none of my business who I kiss, man. I don't ask you for permission. But he said something completely different. And he said, why do I not love you as much as I love her? That is simple. I will explain it to you now. And he said this. He said, when a blind man and a person who can see are in the darkness, they are all blind. But when the light comes, those who can see the light. But those who are blind still cannot see me. And what he's primarily saying is this woman here that I'm kissing, she can see things. She understands completely. You mob here, you're blind. When the light comes, you still can't see me. In the Gospel of Thomas, I think it's verse 24, Mary says to Jesus, what are your followers like? I want to stop for a second, think about that. Guess who's not included as a follower? She's not. He says, what are your followers like? And you know what he said? They're like children in a field who take off their clothes and know not where they're found, and goes on to talk about them being like children. Now, what he didn't say was this: don't exclude yourself from the followers. You're one of my followers too. He could have said that, but he didn't. In fact, when we go through this time after time after time, we see a difference. Now, if I can, and I'll stop after this one because I wanted to read these three to give you a bit of a feeling here. I'm going to read verse 83 from the Dialogue of the Saviour. And this is what Mary said. Now, you've got to remember, this is a conversation that's taking place between Mary, Thomas, Matthew, and Jesus. Now, they ask questions. Mary makes statements. And here's a statement I find really interesting. Mary said, there is but one saying, I will speak to the Lord concerning the mystery of the truth. In this, we have taken our stand, and to the cosmic, we are transparent. Now, in that last sentence, there's three plurals. She uses the word we 3 times. We've taken our stand, and to the cosmic, we are transparent. He says, I want to talk to Jesus about the mystery of the truth. Well, there's a lot of people on this planet would like to know about that, but here's what's interesting. The next saying after that, verse 84, this is Judas speaking to Matthew. That's Thomas speaking to Matthew. This is the only time in the whole scripture that they talk to each other. Because guess what? Mary and Jesus have gone. They've gone, right? And then what happens is Judas says to Matthew, we want to understand the sort of clothes and garments we are to be clothed with when we depart the decay of the flesh. So they want to know when they die, well, how they're going to dress up their corpse. And whereas Mary wants to take a stand about the mystery of the truth, and we'll take our stand, and we're going to be open to the transparent, these guys are saying, yeah, when I'm dead, what will I put on my clothes? What sort of clothes will I want? But here's the point. They're not asking Jesus. He's not there. They're talking to each other. So what I'm trying to say in this, and what's become really obvious to us, is when you go through these scriptures, there is a commonality here about the role of the woman here. And the role of the woman, if I can go back to the dreaming, I've got to make the point, women's magic was always considered stronger than men's magic, without exception. And that goes back to the very first dreaming story when 2 sisters who had all the magic and had these magic rocks inside a dilly bag they carried, and their brother stole it off one of the sisters. And the sister was asked, you're going to kill your brother? He stole your magic. And she said, no, I will let him keep those totems, and I'll let him keep the rocks, because his magic can never be as powerful as women's magic, because women can create life. Men cannot do that. Therefore, let him have the toys. But when it comes to the real magic, I have that. Now, what I'm starting to sense as I read this, as we go through this time after time, is a definition here between the women, the one woman there. But you've got to remember when Jesus is around. 2,000 years ago, And at that time, there were all the Jewish elite were female. All the Roman leaders, the Jewish elite were male. The Roman elite were male. Everywhere it was male. All the males, all the different imams, all the different priests, everyone was male. And here's Jesus and Mary together, basically taking Mary aside time after time after time to discuss things. And I'll give an example. You know that mystery that she was given in the Gospel of Bartholomew, which is another one. By the way, you've got to remember one thing, that the 4 Gospels, 2 of them aren't disciples. They never met Jesus, okay? I'm talking about people who actually met him and put down stories there. And Bartholomew later on came up to Mary and said, that what you said to Jesus, what he said, could you share it with us? And Mary said this, if I share this wisdom with you, the disciples, fire will come out of my mouth and destroy and consume the whole world. This magic is far too strong for you to listen to or understand. Now, can you see what's taking place here? And of course, there's a beautiful part of this story in the Gospel of Mary. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, there is a Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Most of it's been destroyed. Don't worry, about 9/10 of it was destroyed, but a little did remain. And what's interesting in the little that remained was that this is after Jesus has been supposedly crucified. I don't know exactly what happens there. I'm not going to walk down that path. And Mary has a vision, which he tells them all about. And at the end of it, Peter stands up and said, why should we listen? And I'm not lying about this, ladies and gentlemen. Why should we listen to any woman? And this woman, why should we listen? And then what happens is that both Thomas and Matthew stand up and say, how can you contend with the woman? They call her the woman. Jesus anointed her above all of us. How can you say this about her? And what actually happens is, what you get into this story is that some of the men stormed off. And this is basically what happened to Christianity at this stage. It's a bit like the fight after Muhammad died. There were 2 groups, the Sunnis and the Shiites, fighting about which is the right way to go. So this is not unusual. I'm not having a go at any group. This is just what happens. Matthew was outraged that Peter could contend with the woman, and so was Thomas. And where did Thomas go? He went back to India, didn't he? Mm-hmm. And what was Thomas called? The twin. The twin of who? Jesus. Can you see that link? It keeps coming back all the way through this, okay? They leave. They've had a gutful. And who stays behind? Andrew and Peter. And then who starts to take over where Christianity runs? Andrew and Peter. And this is why we wanted to do this story the way we are, which is to explain to people that if you look at what's in Thomas, or can I give you an example of the Gospel of Eve? Are you aware of the fact, Rob, there was a Gospel of Eve?
I've heard of it. I've never actually read it, but I did hear about there was I think it was close to like 62 different books that were omitted from the original, like when they conglomerated all the text into one giant book. But go ahead.
Well, they destroyed most of Eve, I'm pleased to say, mate. So don't worry, we won't be tainted by this. We're safe. We're okay because they did destroy it. But there was a writing that was put in there by one of the guys who destroyed it, who made a quote. And that's the only thing we got left is the quote. He showed the quote to vilify Gnosticism. And what Eve told us, and you'd think maybe she's got a bit of an idea here, and we're going to talk about Eve now. We'll talk about her a bit more. I mean, she was there way back at the start, according to the book, wasn't she? So you take some notice. And she said the soul of man and woman is the same soul you will find in a fish, in a snake, and in a tree. Now, does that sound Christian or does that sound animist? It sounds very animist, doesn't it?
Very much so.
And then you look
everything's connected. Everything's connected into one specific soul.
That's where I'm starting to see this connection. And look at Pistis Sophia, where they go into great detail, because in Pistis Sophia, that happened, they say 3 or 4 years after the death. And each of the disciples, the 19 disciples, by the way, Rob, 12 men and 7 women, 19 disciples in Gnosticism, not 12. Right. Each had to learn this mantra before they could see Jesus, because he was going to show himself as light, pure light. Okay. And when he did show himself as light, he made it very clear. He asked each of them to ask any question they wanted to know. And basically what this is Mary and Jesus sitting around the kitchen table and the kids putting up their hand occasionally. And Mary started asking by the very first question, how did life come about? How did this start? How did the whole thing begin? And what he said was this, yes, the soul was brought down by Sophia, right? And she brought this soul down, and the soul that we have is the same soul, and here we go again, that is found in animals, in beasts of burden, in fish, in birds, and in trees, and in rocks. This comes out of Pisces Sophia. Now, when I'm starting to read these things, I'm thinking, hang on for a sec. This is straight out of the American indigenous beliefs on how the place is created. It's out of the original beliefs. It's out of the pagan beliefs. This bubbling spring that Jesus is talking about, this goes way back. The stuff they're talking about there tells me this is not just a thing about equality of sexes. I'm seeing other things in here that start to really question what's taking place there. We've got an account in one of our books that was written by the 6th century. I don't know what the leader of Jerusalem was at the time, when was talking of a story that took place where someone bailed up Mary and tried to arrest her. And I want to talk about that next. And basically what happened was that the people who touched her turned to glass. They couldn't go near her. Her magic was so strong in the finish. You do realize in the finish, do you know how they got rid of her? Rob, they don't. Well, that's the point. You see, so much of this has never been told. It's really sad because it hasn't been told. They were so scared of Mary, right? Now, they've killed Jesus, right? And you've got to remember, when Jesus was killed, what did all the disciples do when he was hung up on the cross? Did they come up and follow him, or did they run and hide?
Well, that was one of the observations I wanted to make before we jump into that next spot, is some of these apostles didn't even know the true meaning of the two together. And it seems like they were almost like either they're written to seem oblivious to the fact that the yin and the yang is standing right in front of them. And I believe that the transition of Jesus, now that you're saying this, couldn't have happened without contact with Mary Magdalene yet again, to send his essence away or to resurrect again. I think that he had to come in contact to complete that circuit of the yin and the yang, which is everything is built on. But go ahead.
You got it in one. That's what I admire most about what I'm seeing here. I'm realizing that really what this is about was Jesus was the one that would go in the red tent when the women were menstruating. The men would never do it. Jesus would tend to the women at stages when the men wouldn't go near it. Where's all this thinking coming from? Where's this radical thinking coming from? It's coming from Mary. And look, you've got to remember something in this story, that what we're finding in all these different texts, it doesn't matter which one you pick up, there is a real delineation here that Mary, look, what happened was when Jesus was dead, Mary was still preaching. And that's why Gnosticism, a lot of people believe the Gospel of John is actually Mary's. I believe it is too. It was the last book to get in. And Nicaea, they ummed and ahed because in it says the kingdom of heaven is within. These sorts of things, we don't want to talk about that too much. That's sounding very Hindu and animist, isn't it? It's within. Yep. And in Thomas, they come up and say, where is it? They said, where is it? He said, can't you see it? It's inside you. Can't you see that? And they're basically saying, no. Where is it again, please? Could you give me another location? There. Oh, right, okay. And in fact, in the Gnostic Scriptures, there are occasions where Jesus actually despairs. There's one occasion where he says, I can't talk to Andrew anymore. He does not understand a thing I say to him. He never listens. And then the disciples come up and beg him to keep him there. And that he basically gives and says, yeah, I'll try again. But honestly, some of these people here, and you're right, I really do not belong to be part of this group, because what he was doing, he wasn't teaching about Judaism. He was talking about a bubbling spring that's the beginning of everything. He was talking about a religion that began at the start. He was trying to get them to realize that a lot of what they were doing was wrong. And when the Judaic religion in 8th century BC got rid of Asherah, they lost their feminine compass. And by this time now, all of the religions on the planet were losing that feminine compass. And what Jesus was trying to do was to bring back Mary. And that is why they had to kill Mary. But here's the difference. They crucified Jesus, but they would not crucify Mary. In fact, nobody, from my understanding, was prepared, not even the soldiers were prepared to go near her. So what they did was this. They banished her on a ship without rudders, without an oar, and without a sail into the Great Sea, which is the Mediterranean Sea. And they said, you are to leave us. Now, the idea was if you don't, nobody there, and there were no sailors there either, right? What's going to happen to her? She's going to drown. But we don't do it. We didn't touch her. We didn't kill her because nobody wanted to kill her. They were more scared of killing her than they were scared of killing Jesus, because I knew that she had a power that was beyond anyone else, and it was showing. I'll explain how it finishes up, and you'll know how it did take place. So what happened was they banished her. How many people got on the boat with her? Somewhere between 40 to 60 people. How many people went down to Jesus when he was being crucified? Mary Magdalene, his mother, Salome, and no men. About 4 women, and that was a sum total. In fact, Peter was asked 3 times before the cockerel crowed. 3 times he was asked, do you know who this man is? You know what Peter said each time? No, never met him before. And you know who was asking about? Jesus. Peter said 3 times, and it's in the Bible, not in the Gnostic Bible, by the way. It's in the exoteric Bible. 3 times he was asked who Jesus was. He said, I know him not. But probably 15 years later, about 60 people got on this boat. Now, they knew they were going to die. They knew that was the deal, and they expected to die, but they didn't. What happened was that boat sailed all the way from Judea to Gaul, which is France. And when they got close there, and for some people, they might get offended by what I'm going to say next, Sarah, who is one of Jesus and Mary's children. Now, remember, they've only been doing this for 3 years, but they've got a child already. Now, since then, we've gone another 10, 12 years, which would make her about 14. What happened was we're not sure whether she laid down a cloak across the sea, because you've got to remember most people couldn't swim, or whether it was a hare. But one of the two, she laid that down and they all walked to Gaul. They came to Gaul. Mary met the king of Gaul and did all this different magic, and within straight away, all other religions were banished and they followed Mary. Now, I want to make the point, they did not follow Jesus, they followed Mary. Mary then lived in a cave for a period of time, and most people know where the cave is. And it is said that she was up in the cave. She stayed up in the cave naked, like a sadhu would, just like the Indian sadhus were naked also. And people would climb up the cave to get wisdom. And she never ate again. They said that angels would fly down and feed her manna for heaven. And then she disappeared one time. But during that period she was in France, she did so many miracles that the whole of France then followed her. And that led to the Cathars and Templars, who were really following Mary. And that's why we want Lynn and Clive to talk about that part of the story, which we won't. They'll do that part. And that's where basically, and you've got to remember the Vatican, when they decided they were going to kill the Cathars, it was put to the Pope that they're villagers here. The Cathars run the villages, but the villagers have got nothing to do with this. They just like them because the Cathars made it so everyone was equal and everyone was treated so much better. And they were so happy, man. They wanted to stay. And what the Pope said was kill them all. God knows his children. He will look after them. The rest can die. Kill them, a lot of them. So that's what you've got. The Vatican has decided, yes, we know there are innocent people there. We don't care. Kill them all. We don't care. And they represent Peter. The Cathars and the Templars represent Mary. And that's really what the whole of Christianity has been about. And that is why in about, I think it was about 1000, they decided to turn Mary into a prostitute because she's always been a problem. Okay. And sometimes we get the two mixed up, Mary the mother and Mary Magdalene. They are basically doing the same story about the women's aspect and the women's part of this. Sorry, Rob.
I'm just, it was a profound moment. And I've also heard that, you know, Sarah was actually injected into the royal family once the king found what Mary Magdalene was. They took one of the children into the royal family, which would later, I believe, breed a line to Joan of Arc, which would bring independence to France at some point later on down the line. And it shows this amazing timeline that's happening. And I believe that once Jesus left this plane of existence, whatever existing power he had went back to Mary Magdalene, because they were one and the same. And now that she's so feared, that once they killed Jesus, the Romans almost kind of became, I don't want to say, they got placated a little bit. Like, if we destroy Mary too, the whole world's going to face destruction. They were basically drawing from the life force of the planet. So now, instead of doing that, they sent her off, and they were like, she's somebody else's problem. And I think that they were very afraid of her. Very afraid of her.
They were afraid of her because she was like the cult of Asherah. Right? The Jews had been through this before. They knew what this was about. And they knew now that Jesus was gone and that people were following her. You've got to understand, Gnosticism was as strong in the 100s and the 200s as the exoteric religion were. They were competing against each other. And Gnosticism was saying, you mob here, the other mob, you're following the Altar Baalath. You're actually following the devil. You're following the wrong figurehead. And if you look at the way they behaved when they tried to kill the Cathars and the Templars, where they said kill everybody, who's speaking there? Who are they speaking on behalf there? A benevolent God? I doubt it.
No.
God doesn't make that decision. I mean, the idea of a person killing another person for me is an insult to God. God does that business, not us. We're not allowed to. So the whole thing, and the way the Cathars, if you look at the way the Cathars and Templars treated the peasants, man, everyone in France wanted to go down there. Because you got the chance. You could be anyone. You could be a peasant and make your way up the list. There was no rules like that. And you've got to remember, yes, Rob, you're right. They took Sarah and they thought, we'll make a bloodline through the whole of Europe. And they started with a pure bloodline, but I'm sorry, boys and girls, the bloodline got tainted as it went. And they put in other blood, big time. The cabal became part of that. And Sarah's line, as you said, it went to Joan of Arc. It stayed in France for quite some time. But it didn't stay in Italy. It didn't stay in Austria. It didn't stay in Germany. It didn't stay in England. And in those bloodlines, other things got involved. But remember, all of that aristocracy comes out of Sarah and Mary. That was the original idea. My God, these people are aware. Let's keep them. Let them run the show. So the idea to begin with, and people to this day still want a benevolent dictator, but you can't get one. I'm sorry, boys and girls, you can't. You might think it's Donald Trump, but it ain't. There is no such thing anymore. But that's what they were looking for. And they had one. They knew when Mary was in, but Mary was in Gaul, in that cave. There were no wars in Gaul. There was nothing going on. Everyone was living a perfect life. And when the Cathars come, they wanted to instill that same system that was there then. And they tried to. And of course, you can imagine the Vatican said, we can't have this. We just cannot have it. Imagine if the whole church followed what they're doing. We wouldn't have any wars. And the world today would be a far better place than it is. But that was really important. To me, it's very important people understand that I have no issue about Jesus being who he was. I don't believe for 1 second he didn't exist. I know he existed. What I have an issue about is that it was mum and dad together. There were two people in this. And if you talk, we did a show quite recently with Omar, with a gentleman from India, and he made a very compelling story about the fact that Jesus did all of his apprenticeship. He went back to India.
Yep. Kiera Windrider.
That's the one. Yep. He was good. We're going to get him on one of our shows because he really made, and as I said to him at the time, when I do this presentation, I certainly will be harking back to India, because the links there are incredibly strong. And my point is too, why was it that from the time that Jesus was crucified or whatever happened, I'm not sure if he even was, what did Thomas do? He went straight back to bloody India. Why did he go there? Why did he go to Goa? And why did the Portuguese, when they ended up in Goa, all they were looking for was Thomas's palm fronds to burn them? They went there to try and destroy all evidence of Thomas being in Goa, and he was there from about, and you've got to remember something about the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas, according to biblical scholars, was written around the time that Thomas was alive, right? The Gospel of John and the Gospel of Matthew were not written around the time they were alive. So if you want to look at the Gospels that were actually written by the disciples, it is well known that none of the 4 Gospels in the Bible are a face-to-face contact. They're from someone else that represents Matthew and John, who wrote it, and the other 2, Luke, he was never there. Luke said this is all the truth, and he was taught by a person that never met Jesus either. In fact, was killing Christians, and then decided this is a bad thing. And that was one of his disciples. And he says, I know everything about what happened there. My gospel is the absolute truth. And my teacher, who never met Jesus, he told me this. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's pretty good. I'd be behind that 110%. Whereas in Thomas's case, the reason why Thomas has never got in there is 114 sayings. He doesn't talk about miracles. Doesn't mention them once. And that was very important. Miracles were a very important part about this. They wanted to own the magic. Therefore, they couldn't put it in. What it does tell me in there is, number one, it talks a lot about Mary. She's in there quite a few times, and Peter. And Peter comes out of this the way I read it to you. In fact, I've got this open at the Gospel of Thomas. 114.
Let's put you on the solo layout so you can do it. I think it's wild. Didn't the Vatican send the Portuguese to go take care of whatever Thomas had left behind?
Yes. Yeah, that was the purpose of it. They didn't come there to colonize as such. I mean, they did as well as, but they came there first of all looking for, and there were Thomasean monks that were there at the time, and women, sisters, who were actually chanting the different things on these papers. And they were written on palms by Thomas, and they were still there. And it was interesting because I read one of the quotes from Thomas, and the gentleman, Chiara, he read a quote from his book, right? It was verse 3, and they were identical.
Yep. And it seems as if the Vatican at some point turned its back on the actual people that brought the religion to life, or at least the following to life. That's why they got rid of the Cathars. That's why they got rid of the Knights Templar. They were literally destroying the trail of the contact with these 2 entities, with Jesus and Mary and their abilities, and they had to go through and essentially destroy all lines of thought, or all thoughts of the process, back to these 2 entities that were essentially changing life as we know it and showing the magic. They were destroying anything and everything that ever had contact with that magic, or scooping it up. And eventually, when the Knights Templar outserved their purpose, your time is now too. There you go. See you later. And that to me is it again points to a red flag that says there's something here that's beyond our understanding at this time, because it was whitewashed. So, people talk about the Holy Grail and how it might be this chalice, but from my understanding, the Holy Grail is a document that shows the bloodline of Mary Magdalene and Jesus and their disciples and descendants all the way up to right now. And it's still being worked on to this day, which is why nobody can find it. It's probably in some vault that the cabal has right now, still keeping track of who's who and what's what. Man.
Yes, that's exactly right. The bloodline, the grail is the bloodline. It's not a cup. It doesn't matter what sort of cup you want to make it. And it's really important that people understand. And I've actually found the quote. I'm going to read it to you now, 114. Okay. Simon Peter said to them, Mary should leave us, for women are not worthy of life. That's very straightforward. That's not a symbolic statement. That's the last statement that Thomas put in the book. Now, I want to make a point about this. Why do you think Thomas put that in as the last statement? To remind people, if you're going to walk down the line of Peter, remember what he said, for women are not worthy of life. Now, if you want to walk down and follow a person that's making that comment, and that comment was made basically at the end of this, not at the start. It's not as if it was a novice coming into this, because I could find quotes like this all the way through. And I think it's really important people understand that the Council of Nicaea in 321 or 325, I'm not sure which one it was there to do one thing. It was to take the feminine voice out of Gnosticism. It was to destroy Gnosticism because apart from being so pro-feminine, it was also pro quite a few other things they didn't want in there. But I would suggest to you the major thing, like the Gospel of Philip. How can we have Jesus kissing Mary on the mouth often? Now that is what it is. You know what comes out of that, Rob? Babies. It's as simple as that. I'm sorry. There's no other way to read it. I mean, if it's a platonic relationship and it's based around the word Plato. Now, Plato was homosexual, so he wasn't kissing women. Okay, I get that. That's fine. This one, it's not just occasion. It's not a peck. It's on the mouth often is the word there. And it runs through every part of this. Time after time, they ask, why do you love her more than us? It is a common question, and it's because they're jealous. Yes, I get that. But what I can see within that, I see that John, Matthew, Thomas were pro-feminine, pro-esoteric, pro-Gnostic, and therefore banned. And really, honestly, guys, I've got to tell you, you've got two guys in the Testaments, two guys in the of the four Gospels that we agree never met Jesus. And then we agree the other two that did, this was written well after they were dead. So it was written by someone else. So it's secondhand information. But the Gospel of Mary was written by Mary. The Gospel of Thomas, and they've said this because they've said, the scholars, not me, have given it a date of 50. Not me. They've said, oh, look, here's a saying in Thomas, but in the other ones it's added to and more is added to it. This is the more basic saying. And time after time, and these 6 sayings we've never seen before. They're not in anyone else's stuff. But this one here again, they show you another one, they've added bits to it. When you add things to it, that's done after the event. So what they're saying, the sayings from Thomas that are recognized elsewhere, are in their crudest and more basic form and added to further on. So they've said from the very beginning that's the case. Now, if that is the case, then Thomas should be the first book that should have been put in there, because it's the only one we know for sure was written by someone that was there. And second should be Mary. There is a gospel called the Gospel of Mary Salome, and Mary Salome was there too. Well, that should be in there. Honestly, the two Marys, and there's a gospel about Mary the mother. Oh, and there's one other one that got thrown out, the Gospel of Judas.
Mm-hmm.
And that tells a completely different story, ladies and gentlemen. So we can't, and that's very esoteric too. So we can't have that in there, because in Judas, he tells a completely different story. He was told, and it makes it very clear in there, Jesus knew exactly what was going on. And when Jesus said to him, go and do your business, which is what he said, and he walked off to do it, Jesus told him to go and do your business. Okay, who gave him the business? Jesus did. And that's what's on in that gospel too. So when you look at the problem is that if we had the Nag Hammadi books, and they were the ones that were the Bible, I would say to people, you don't actually have to go to the Hopi Scriptures. You don't have to read the Dreaming. It's already in this one. Go and read Thomas. What's in there? I mean, what we did with that book way back, Rob, when we started doing this, of the 114 sayings there, I actually went to a gentleman called Big Bill Nedji, who was the keeper of Kakadu National Park, who gave it back to the Australian government for a 99-year lease because they still own it. He's the one who signed off. And he had a book called Big Bill Nedji, Kakadu Man. And the sayings in there are identical to Thomas. In fact, we did a count of the 114 sayings, and I found about 75 identical sayings in what Big Bill Nedji was saying about Kakadu National Park, about how sacred it was. And what we found In sometimes, mate, there was no difference. In one case, Bill Nedgy says, when you walk upon the earth, walk upon it like a rainbow. And then what Jesus said is, when you walk upon the earth, walk upon it, be a passerby, walk lightly. And you'll find the sayings, when you keep reading the sayings in Bill and you read the sayings in Thomas, you think, my God, this is the same business. And this is what we found, and that's what we're going to talk about, is there is such a link between Gnosticism, which I believe is the true Christian story, and the dreaming, and the Bhagavad Gita. Why leave it out? I mean, I'm pretty sure there's a link there.
All of it.
All of it. It's all. And what Jesus was doing, like I said before, he was tending a bubbling spring. If you tend something, Rob, you don't own it, do you?
No, you're looking after it.
You're looking after it, man. So what he did is when he went to India, and as you say before, Kiara was talking about the fact he went to see all the different teachers. And what he also claims is Mary actually went and saw all the different teachers, including some of the male teachers also. Which means in India, she was doing exactly the same thing she did and then followed Jesus across. And, you know, we're going to get him on soon because he made a really compelling case for the fact that Mary of Magdala, or Mary Magdalene, it could have been in India and followed, and they met each other and they worked together there and came across, and they became a partnership. And a partnership not just in the spiritual sense. I've got to make this point. We got to get our head around this. It's mouth kissing time, and it happened a lot. And Sarah is a child that came from Mary, and Mary wasn't kissing anyone. That's made really clear in Philip, because in Philip, it's basically the whole thing starts with that. It starts with them saying, what's going on here? And then he goes further, you know. He talks about the fact, he says that you've got to be careful. If you don't see, you'll end up like, and he told, you've heard the saying, we've all heard this, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. You heard that one? Yep. No one does the line before. The line before is the important line. It's about they, the ones who were there before then, not the meek, but the other ones. And it says they shall be there. And the meek, which is not the right terminology, it's the peaceful ones. It's the ones who don't fight, the ones who don't engage themselves in war, shall look away. And when they come back, they shall be gone. Now that came out of Philip too. Well, they can't put that in. What, you're telling me the hierarchy? And there's another part where Jesus says, if your leaders tell you to pray that way, ignore them. If they tell you anything, whatever your leaders tell you, do not trust them. Don't trust your leaders in any shape or form. Do not trust the church. He makes that clear in Thomas. Do not trust the leaders. And they say, once the disciples say, how shall we pray? How shall we give alms? How shall we do these things? And he says that everything you spoke about will harm you. If you pray, it will harm you. Because why are you doing it? You're doing it because someone told you to do it. I said the kingdom of heaven is within. And now you're transporting it from somewhere else. The Gospel of Thomas is so much against the church. I can see why the Vatican decided they had to put an embargo of 25 years on it. If that was, there's a beautiful ceremony they did too. The Gnostics would do, which is the kissing of the serpent. And I wanted to finish it because I think that's really important. I really need to talk about that a bit. Because in the Gnostic Scriptures, they talk about the fact that Mary was the one who learnt, right? Mary is the one, and I'm going to try while we're talking to find a particular quote here, by going to the actual, the tree of knowledge and supping from it. In the Gnostics, that was considered wisdom, not what we think it is. And there's a beautiful saying, which unfortunately there's so many of these damn things. I'm trying to find the Apocalypse of Adam. And I did, 277. And I want to read you the first part of that because it's really important. And it tells you about the fact the women had stronger magic. And it's this one. And I'll try and read this to you now. Okay. This is about Adam and Eve, okay, at the beginning. I went about with her in a glory which she had seen in the eon from which they had come forth. She taught me the word of knowledge of the eternal God, and we resembled the great angels, for we are higher than the God who created, and the powers with him, for we do not know this yet. And who taught him that? Mary did. Eve did, rather. Eve taught him, Adam, and he was talking to his son Seth. Remember that, because here's the point. Cain and Abel are not Eve's children. People have got to understand that. Seth, he was talking to Seth and saying, Eve taught me the knowledge I did not have. How did she teach him that? Because Eve is the one who went to the tree of knowledge. Now, I've got to make a point in this story, because people say, no, this is bad. Bad to go to the tree of knowledge and to learn wisdom. As a kid, I always had a problem with that, Rob. But you know what I had a bigger problem with? I read the part of the story where this happens. And do you know what happens after Eve eats that knowledge? And God comes down and he's pissed, mate. He's really angry. So guess what happens? Adam and Eve hide behind a bush. And do you know what God says? Where are you? I can't find you anymore. I want to banish you here, but I don't know where you are anymore. And he could not find them until Adam decided to stand up and say, God, I'm over here, mate. Now what's going on? Right then, now that I've found you, God is supposed to have created the Garden of Eden. But what happens is that Eve decides to become wise. Then they hide from God. And he says, I want to banish you, but I can't find you. My question is, if Adam didn't stand up, would that mean that Adam and Eve could have stayed there? And my question is, you've got to ask yourself a question here, ladies and gentlemen. What sort of God is this that bans people from learning wisdom? And then when you do learn wisdom, you hide behind a bush and God can't find you until you give yourself up. I'm thinking to myself, I'm not so sure that you're back on the right team here. And that's basically, I think, what the Gnostics were on about here. They kept saying, guys, you've signed up with the wrong team. We've signed up with the team where the soul that we have is in a snake, it's in a bird, it's in the fish. We're all one. There's no pyramid where we're at the top. It's a big circle and we're all in the same circle, and you're incarnated this time as a person. Next time you might be a dolphin. I'd put my hand up for that, to be honest, right now. I'd much prefer to be a dolphin or a whale. Man, even the tree. Put me up for, oh, hang on, no, probably not.
Absolutely. I'd do it too. And, another thing I was thinking about is that during this time of, let's say, Mary Magdalene and Jesus, it was of all light. And then slowly, when the Vatican was taking control, come the Dark Ages. It wasn't, plagues or anything else. It was the dawning of man over Mary Magdalene and Jesus, and man controlling the Vatican to the point in which the Vatican was taking control and gaining influence and power, which brought upon the Dark Ages, which is another metaphor that they're telling us without truly telling us, right? Like, I feel like that there's certain things in history that play out where the name facilitates the term, but they are not telling us exactly what it means properly. And I think that this is like the shedding of that light and that earthly magic going back to the earth and being dormant gives the ability for the Vatican to truly take on a lot of the power from the vacuum of those sources being gone.
That's exactly right, mate. You've got it in one. And you think about this too. They wiped out the Cathars and they wiped out the Templars, and straight after that, the Renaissance began. They thought they were going to kill the light. That's what they were trying to do. And it was a deliberate ploy. It's not as if the Cathars and the Templars were doing bad things. They were doing the opposite. They were doing wonderful things, and people loved what they were doing. They all wanted to live there. And what they did was they said, well, we can't have that. We can't have them living in a Gnostic way, because that is the way we should live. I mean, there's a lot of things. I'm going to be very careful, because a lot of people are Catholics, are really good people and are religious people and believe in God, and they're doing it for all the right reasons. I'm not trying to make this an attack on them personally. I'm just attacking the institution, not the individuals. If you want to be a Catholic, fine, you can be. I know many people who are Catholics who are wonderful human beings. I'm not making a aspersion against them. But what I am saying is, I know for an absolute fact that the book that you're reading from is incomplete. And you've got to remember something. It was chosen by a Roman butcher, dictator, conqueror. He made the decision about what books went in and what books didn't go in. The 20 bishops were chosen by him, and he gave them rules about what could go in there. So yes, you believe in Jesus Christ, fantastic. Got no problem with that. But you don't understand Mary. And I think that is a problem, because if Mary was understood, she was the first pope, not Peter.
That's so true. So true.
She was the first.
And on this show, we have a very big distinction between faith and church. Faith and church are so, they're polar opposites, right? Just like you're saying, the faith is your embodiment of being able to kind of call upon a higher power, or the resonance of that on an earthly plane, and and it's immutable because it's done by God and Jesus and those things. But the church is corruptible because it's done by man, and it's meant to, as an organization, to capitulate, not to empower. So that we are on board with that notion, and I love the fact that you said that.
Yeah, I think this is a really important part of what Christianity was supposed to be. It was supposed to be a ritual that was carried out in your household by anyone that was there, because you were all basically the priests there. And sometimes you'd be kissing snakes, which is what the Hopi used to do when they catch the snakes, and they do the same things. And they were venerating the snake, ladies and gentlemen. And the other mob were reviling the snake, and they were saying the snake is given wisdom, which is what the Hopi said too. Snakes are not bad animals. I mean, basically, a snake won't bite you unless you get in its way. Seriously, we've got where we live. We've got 3 of the top 10 most dangerous snakes on the planet. We walk past them all the time. We walk past them. I've seen them all the time, and they just look at us and they keep our way. We go our way. And I look at them and think, aren't they beautiful looking animals? And we've got big carpet snakes here. Pythons are about 11 foot long, and they're beautiful looking animals with patterns on them. And they'll come down and look at you and come this close with their fangs like that, just smelling your breath and watching you. And they come really close and watch you. And they know, man, I'm 11 foot tall. You can't hurt me. And I'm looking at them saying, I'm not touching you. But the point I'm getting at is, we gave the snake a bad reputation. Why? What did it do? It gave us wisdom. Why would that be a bad thing? Because I've got to tell you, serpents around the rest of the world are venerated. We call them dragons. We call them serpents. In Australia, we call them the rainbow serpent. You know, the Chinese and other religions talk about the dragons. They never look upon them as being stupid, horrible animals. They look upon them as being animals of wisdom and celebrate their presence. What happened in one book is we took part of that book. See, the problem with the Bible is this part here. All of these ones here that are in here aren't in there. And every one of them should be. I mean, you've got to get the whole story. You've got to remember that so many of these things were written by everybody in the Bible. The Old Testament, none of them are written by Jesus. I mean, you've got some people in the Old Testament telling us that basically that if you're going to give away your daughter, it can't be to the tribe alongside, but any other tribe you can. And of course, when you go to church, you must slaughter a bull because God loves the smell of flesh rotting and blood. And you can't shave your temples because that's a bad thing to do. God wouldn't like that. All those things are in the Bible. By the way, the same where all that stuff is, that's the same part where they run down homosexuality. It's only in one section. And that's in the same section that tells you how you sell your child. So, you know, when people talk about that, say, yeah, what about your children? How do you give them away? Because it's in the same section, bud. Follow both of them. So the point is with the Bible is that it was a combination of anything that was written. And what happened was they collected everything and said, we will decide what Jesus and what the Creator wanted in that book. And from that point on, the Pope became an interlocutor for Jesus and for all of the spirits up there. And he alone, and it's always a he alone. It was a woman once. She snuck in for a while. But he alone is the only person who can speak on behalf of God. And that is a complete contradiction to what Jesus said when he said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. They've stolen it. And they've said, no, we own it. And that's basically what the problem is. And the old teachings are, like the Hopi said, we are the ones we are waiting for. What did Jesus say? Same thing. Same thing. Yep. So that Mary said it too.
You know, it's wild that everything that comes from like a within man, let's say, of a power that resides on this man, the earthly plane, is either a deception of omission or half truths without the full story. And this conference that you're doing, just to bring it full circle, is bringing balance back.
Yeah.
And I think that that balance is something that we preach all the time. And not saying that we're pastors or giving sermons, but when we talk about spirituality and oneness, we've got to talk about the separate components of the masculine and the feminine and the alignment of both. And what you're doing is you're shedding a light to how the whitewashing of one generation affected so many thousands of years of mankind, and making them more subservient to the fact that they're not in alignment with their feminine and understanding the full empowerment of the feminine side, the nurturing side, the thirst for knowledge side, which is something that we're bringing back to the light now and kind of bringing back to the forefront so we can move into that next yuga or that split with those tools of empowerment. And I think that that's, and that's kudos to you, because that's exceptional work, my friend.
Thank you. Well, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to cover this part of the story to say, if you want to go to the Bible, great. If you want to make that your manual, fantastic, great. Do all that, but understand something, that what you're reading in there, that the Gospels are good. I've read them. They're quite good. They say a lot of good things that you can take on board. But remember one part of this that's not there. And you're right about this, Rob. You've got to think about what's happened over the last 2,000 years. Who started all the warfares with the cross? It was the Christians who started this first. It wasn't the Muslims. The Muslims responded later down after they were attacked, right? But who went to Jerusalem 4 or 5 times? King Richard was one to say, we're going to take this place back because this is where Jesus was, therefore we own it. We started doing that way back, and that was all because we'd lost the feminine. And there were so many wars that were fought when both sides carried the cross, and they said, I'm fighting for Jesus, and Jesus wasn't there. Jesus says, you're not fighting for me, man. Look at my book, look what I wrote. I never spoke about this. I never said to do any of this stuff. So they've done these things over the last 2,000 years. And let's be honest, all religions have done it to an extent. But one religion, and it was the main religion that's at fault, is the Christian religion, because it became, now you're not a Christian. Well, then we'll have to dominate you. We'll have to kill you. We'll have to wipe you up. We'll burn down your church, and we'll make you Christian. And then other religions did that in return, in response to that. But it was the Christians who started that story. They started that in Jerusalem. They started being the colonialists then, and then they kept doing it from that point on. Why? Well, around 1000 BC, Mary was a prostitute. Mum was barely mentioned, and it was all about men. There were 12 men that walked around in a group. And, even in that story, Rob, there's something that's left out. Did you know it was never 12? It was never 19. There were 70 men that walked with Judas Iscariot, and all of them carried daggers. Do you know what we call that today? We call that an army. And everywhere they went, the 70 men went there. Now, when they went to Bethlehem, they went to Jerusalem, and they took the temple. They took it for 3 days. They took the temple. How do you take the temple? Because the Jews have their own guards, right? They overcame those guards. And the Romans didn't want to go in because they figured, oh, bugger it. Let them fight between each other. It's like the life of Brian, basically. Let them stand back. Let them fight each other, and we'll take the scraps and deal with it. And that's basically what they wanted to do. They did not step in. They didn't step in. And think about this. How is it that Judas could call an army garrison of Romans to come and meet Jesus, and they'd follow him? What's going on here? What's going on? There's more to this politics than we realize there. Jesus had an army, and I'm going to tell you, people might be offended by that. Judas Iscariot means Judas of the dagger. He carried a dagger. He was a tax collector. They funded the army, and Judas had 70 men with him. And when they went from place to place, they were armed. I'm not saying they were stabbing people, but they carried their daggers. I would be surprised if the daggers were not drawn at the temple when they took it for 3 days and 3 nights. Now, if that is not a revolution, I don't know what is. And notice the Romans did not get involved in this. What they did was they waited for Judas to say, okay, bring that garrison along. I'll point him out. I'll give him a kiss. And when they did that, they captured him then. But Judas was supposed to do that anyway. But the point you've got to ask yourself is, how come Judas could get those Roman soldiers to come? How did he do that? There's more to that story than we really understand. There are things there that don't make sense. Normally a tax collector, a Jewish tax collector in Rome, unless you're the top level, and by the way, you do know who Judas's father was, don't you? Caiaphas. He was the head of the Roman church. He was the head of the Jewish church, man. His nephew was actually Judas. Judas was actually the nephew of Caiaphas, who was running the whole show. And Caiaphas went to Pontius Pilate and said, "Nah, man, I'm not touching this. I'm washing my hands of this. You guys fight it out, and I'll deal with the mob that wins." That's how he was thinking. And that's really what the truth of it was, because there are some gospels he wrote. And he was standing back to watch what was going to happen, because he wasn't convinced that the other mob were going to win. And he thought, well, I'll wait and let them fight it out, and I'll deal with it past that point. So really, when you look at what happened there are so many things that have been lied about, and we don't know the full story anymore. And Judas was doing a job. He joined up to begin with. My understanding, he joined up to be like an insider that let them know what was going on. But in the end, he joined up.
That's crazy. You know, another portion of that is, like you said before, was the great unfolding of how they were pushing this religion on all these other places. Like, and it wasn't the right text. It was, again, that omission, but you were supposed to be subservient to it. So all of this connection to power, it's all derived from this grasp at power, and that is insidious on so many different levels. Imagine, I mean, if we believe in hell, there must be some special place in hell for the people who literally went against the teachings of somebody who was so much of the light. And, you know, that they would have to hope that they're down there burning away right now, because and this is what we're seeing even in today. They're taking the logic or the things that we're seeing or kind of viewing with our own eyes and turning it upside down and corrupting it in such a way that it's hard for us to discern between one and the other. But if we had this information readily available, and I do believe that some places like the Library of Alexandria probably had a lot of these things, burn it down. You know what I mean?
Who burnt down the library? It was Christians.
Yep.
Christians burnt the library down, and no one can deny that's the case, because they said there was so much writing in there that they didn't want known. Basically, what they were trying to do was to get rid of all literature, bar the ones that they approved. This is, if you think Hitler was burning books, man, he's just a precursor. The greatest book burning that ever took place on this planet ever was at Alexandria, and it was done by Christians. All right. So, I mean, it really is important we understand. And the sad part of this is, the really sad part of this is, what Jesus and Mary was talking about was brilliant. It really was. They had it spot on. They were talking about the bubbling spring. If you read the dialogue of the Savior, if you read the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Thomas, you read those scriptures, they are stunning pieces of literature, and there's great wisdom in there. They had it on song. And then what they did was they took what was, I think possibly, I don't know for sure, because I don't belong to any religious group, of the mainstream religions, the one that I think that was the closest to the dreaming, and they made it the furthest. They took it to the far extreme, and what they had to, because a war machine took over. The Romans was a massive war machine, and it was in a state of decay by then. And they thought, if we become Christian and we get Jesus on our side, we'll come back or run the place again. There was basically a group that was trying to run the world, and they needed a religion that they could fashion in that suited those sensibilities. And that was the first priority, ladies and gentlemen. It had to fit into the Roman system that they had at the time. Everything had to fit in neatly into that. Therefore, take out the women, take out all the things that don't fit in there, and leave us with what's left over. And look what happened after that. We've had 2,000 years of dark ages. And then it gets slightly lighter, and we call it Renaissance. But what are we still doing at the same time? We're still killing everyone. And then a bit further on, then there's colonialism. Then we go out and kill people we don't even know anywhere. And we just pick on people who were just sitting there endlessly saying, who are these people? We just kept doing it. And we kept doing it and doing it. We conquered everybody. And that's what the Romans did. You see, this is the point people got to understand. We chose a religion written by conquerors, fashioned by conquerors, and censored by conquerors. And what did we do? We conquered. We started doing exactly the same thing. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. We got that in there. Who wrote that? Nobody knows who wrote it, but we know it's there, don't we? And it's rubbish.
Yeah, we do.
We shouldn't have put it in there.
The Roman Empire was essentially the Vatican. That's exactly what it was. And they were vice versa. You could have classified both within the same realm, and now that's what they are. And a lot of the people in the chat are asking what book you're holding up right now. What the book that you held up before. They were looking at what it was. It was the Non-Hammurabi Library.
Yeah, and it's some of the Gnostic books. There's three I hold up. When we started doing this, we had the Nag Hammadi Library, we had the Gospel of Thomas, Bill Neji, and the fourth one we used was Pictet and Prince's book, the Templar tradition, because I wanted to focus in on how France was there for a while. And then I traced back to Mary and did it from there. So that was our stepping stone. So when we got these guys to actually agree to come on, I was quite chuffed by that, because when we started this whole story, they were our reference book, because we needed 4 good reference books. This is basically all of the books that were put in a jar in Nag Hammadi, which is somewhere in Egypt, and all the other scripts were burnt. And one priest decided this is wrong, and they put them in there. Unfortunately, it was found in 1947 by an Egyptian guy. I suppose you'd call him a peasant. And for quite some time, for over a year, they were taking pages from the Nag Hammadi book and putting it in the oven to start the fire.
That's, finally, that's wild.
There's a lot of gaps in here, man. There's lots of gaps because a lot of it went down, started kindling. And then finally they sold a bit and realized it was worth money, so they stopped using the kindling then. So we lost a lot. I mean, with Mary, we got pages 1, 2, 3, 4, then 26, 27. So there's a gap. There's a vision in the middle we missed. And a lot of it is like that. And sometimes it's unrecognizable. They can't work out what's been written. But they spent about 5 years interpreting it. And they started that just before the ban was finished. And this was the book that came out. There's been quite a lot on Thomas in particular, because that's the one that, as you know, with the Da Vinci Code, that's the one that was really focused on. And I can see why. Because if people did religion like they did with Thomas, there'd be no Vatican. You can't have one, and there'd be no Pope, and there'd be no church. And all of that money, which they are the 3rd largest business company in the world, they were the first for a while, but a couple of computer mobs got in front of them, all that money will go back to people. And there have been a couple of bishops, by the way. There were a couple of popes that were going to give the money back, but one of them died sitting up with his clothes on in bed that night.
Yeah.
He was going to give it all back.
That's not how he died. We know that for a fact. That's definitely, he may have died that way or was positioned in that way, but that is not the way he died. And what a wonderful world that would be without the Vatican pulling strings for the last 2,000 years.
It would have been it would have been like this, what they were talking about. And he knew, that one knew this is wrong. We have to put it back the way we used to. And they still can. I mean, the point being at the moment that according to this book, we are the ones we're waiting for. And that's what the Hoppy said. And that's why we're going to do this particular book. We'll have, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to be quizzing Mesref about Jesus, Mary, the disciples, and a couple of other players that had different religions, and ask a bit more about who they are. Are they? That's
going to be exceptional.
Were they talking from their side? Did they get information for them, or did they pick it up themselves? And what did they think of Jesus and Mary and the disciples and of Muhammad and Krishna, all that mob? That mob, Krishna and Vishnu and all them, I'm pretty damn sure they were from up there. But I want a confirmation on that. I'm pretty sure. Of course. I'd like to ask those questions. And, of course, if I talk to Mesref, I'll find that out. So I'm going to be talking about the different religions and asking Mesref for some questions. And I think people who are locked into a religion might find some of his answers might be a little bit disappointing for them, but they're not really. He's not going to knock any religion as such, but what he will do is tell us if the religion has fallen apart, which it has. All of them have, in different ways. But that's what we'll find out. That's the whole point of that one. And it's our second last one. We've got one to go after that, and then we'll focus really on the ceremony, what's happening, and how
Oh
things.
yeah, I can't wait for the ceremony too. But guys, just in case you didn't hear it before, the link to get your ticket to chapter 25 is in the description of this video, and we're running at right at the end of time. And I just love when you guys always come on. You always bring such amazing intel for us to digest, and I appreciate you, and we love you. And just like you said with the people that are coming onto this conference, that's how I see you guys when you come on. You've changed my world in ways that I could never fully repay you, and I love you guys to death, and it's always a pleasure. And I can't wait even for the next time you guys come on, because I know every time you guys come on, we're going to be cracking some eggs and kind of really diving into what is, right. And I just love it. And I just want to say I appreciate you and thank you, brother.
I appreciate what you guys are doing too, Rob. You and Omar and people like that have been with us all the way through this, and we don't forget our friends. We never do, all the way through. No, all good, mate. Hopefully people come join us for this one, and the next one I'm just going to be setting up the change. We're going to be talking about that, because it's getting closer now. We're running out of time. So what we're going to try and do is just do some repairing work. Acknowledge the people. That's a brilliant book. Jesus and Mary were stunning avatars, wisdom keepers, keepers of law, clever fellas, clever women. And then a Roman Catholic group took control of it and turned it into something it shouldn't be. So yeah, come and find out what it really should be like. We'll read. We're going to read from about 10 different scriptures from here, and we'll talk about different aspects of the story, about the fact that a lot of stuff we spoke about today and more. So come and join us. You're welcome to come along and chuck in some questions, and if we can, we'll answer some of them.
I'll be there. I'll be there with bells on. So
Right,
again, we love you, brother. Thank you so much for coming on. I just want to give a special shout out to the people who contributed to the stream while we were on. Thank you, Selena. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Cecilia. And thank you, John. You guys are absolutely amazing in supporting us and trying to give us that reach to get that next step and to really get out there and change this world. So thank you all. Blessings to all of you. Your contributions were received with love and appreciation. Thank you even for sitting with us and giving us all this incredible information. And this has been Full Spectrum Universe. Thank you so much, my friend.
my pleasure every time, mate. You know that. Thank you.
Always,
See you.
always much love. We'll talk to everybody soon, and we are out of here.
Okay.